you're watching, learning, feeling, will you stay with us? Just one click to subscribe means everything.
What happens when an ancient civilization must redefine itself in a world shaped by modern power struggles? Can a country that once embraced non-alignment now afford strategic ambiguity, or must it choose sides in an era of great power rivalry? These questions form the heart of the India Way, a timely and deeply analytical book by India's Minister of External Affairs, Jaishankar. With the precision of a diplomat and the vision of a strategist, Jaishankar maps out India's evolving place in a volatile, multipolar world. This is not just a book about foreign policy, it is a philosophical reflection on power, history, identity, and survival in the 21st century. In part one of this amazing book, we will focus on India's historical foreign policy posture, the rise of China, multipolarity, strategic autonomy, US-China competition. Chapter 1, The Post-Independence Worldview. At independence in 1947, India inherited both the trauma of partition and the moral authority of being the first major post-colonial nation. India's early foreign policy, shaped by Jawaharlal Nehru, was based on idealism. It championed non-alignment, global disarmament, and the moral high ground. As Jaishankar notes, Nehru's global vision was steeped in liberal internationalism, positioning India as a bridge between the West and the global South. However, this approach had strategic costs. India failed to anticipate China's intentions in Tibet, misread great power interests in South Asia, was unprepared for the 1962 Sino-Indian War, maintained weak defense industrial capacity through the 1950s-70s. The Nehruvian model leaned heavily on moral legitimacy, assuming international rules would constrain aggressive actors. But realpolitik was rarely so cooperative. Chapter 2, The Return of Geopolitics. As Jaishankar argues, we now live in an era of convergences, competitions, and contradictions. The post-1945 order built by the US and its allies, and the 1991 unipolarity following the Cold War, have given way to a more fragmented reality. In this new world, multilateralism is weak. Bilateralism is rising. Institutions like the UN, WTO, and WHO face legitimacy crises. Regionalism and issue-based coalitions are more effective than universal frameworks. Jaishankar frames this as the return of classical geopolitics, where geography, power, and national interest shape outcomes more than norms or ideals. He cites the COVID-19 pandemic as a revealing moment. Instead of global solidarity, nations hoarded vaccines, closed borders, and competed for influence. India must therefore build capabilities, partnerships, and options, not rely on abstract norms. Chapter 3, The Rise of China and India's Strategic Response. Perhaps the most dominant theme in the India Way is the rise of China and what it means for India. Jaishankar does not mince words. China is the most important strategic challenge India faces. Key developments. China's GDP is 5 times India's. Its military modernization and border assertiveness are expanding. Its Belt and Road Initiative BRI aims to reshape Asia's economic geography. China has deepened ties with Pakistan, CBC, and encircled India through the String of Pearls strategy. India, Jaishankar argues, must respond not with confrontation but with competitive coexistence. Improve internal capacities, economy, military, tech, infrastructure. Expand diplomatic influence through Act East policy, Quad, Indo-Pacific engagements. Secure border stability while deterring encroachment. Avoid being drawn into binary choices between the US and China. He points out that while India cannot match China economically in the short term, India's strengths lie in its democratic model, youthful population, open society, and partnerships. Chapter 4, Strategic Autonomy in a Multipolar World. A key innovation in India's foreign policy since the early 2000s is the idea of multi-alignment, engaging with multiple power centers without being tied to any single bloc. India today maintains strong ties with Russia despite its closeness to China, has deepened defense and tech cooperation with the United States, engages with Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Israel simultaneously, works with Japan, ASEAN, and Australia under the Indo-Pacific vision. Jaishankar calls this a new realism where flexibility and outcome-driven diplomacy matter more than ideological positioning. He critiques the non-aligned movement (NAM) as outdated and ineffective in the current context. What India needs, he suggests, is strategic autonomy with hard capabilities, not moral preaching without leverage. Chapter 5: The United States and the Rebalancing of Power. India's evolving partnership with the United States is one of the most significant developments in recent foreign policy. Jaishankar, who served as India's ambassador to Washington, outlines how the India-US Civil Nuclear Agreement 2008 was a turning point. Subsequent governments deepened defense, technology, and intelligence cooperation. India now participates in forums like the Quad alongside the US, Japan, and Australia. Shared concerns about China's assertiveness, terrorism, and supply chain resilience bring both countries closer. However, India remains cautious. Jaishankar warns that U.S. alliances are often transactional and interest-driven, and India must preserve its independent foreign policy. He also emphasizes that India's rise is not to be measured by alignment, but by its ability to shape global outcomes on its own terms. As the first half of this journey reveals, the India way is not just about navigating international relations, it is about rediscovering national agency in a changing world. India is no longer the balancing act of the 1950s, nor merely a rising power waiting to be invited to the table. It is now a nation shaping its own seat, defining its interests, protecting its borders, and influencing global debates. In Part 2, we'll explore how India handles neighborhood diplomacy, Pakistan, South Asia, Indian Ocean. Why culture, history, and civilizational identity matter in diplomacy. The future of multilateralism and India's global role, and how India's foreign policy reflects deeper national confidence. Stay tuned. Can a country chart its future if it forgets where it came from? In a world dominated by Western ideas and shifting alliances, how does a civilizational state like India reclaim its voice, not just as a balancing power, but as a shaping one? In Part 2 of the India Way, Drive S, Jaishankar deepens his argument that foreign policy is not just about power and alliances. It's also about identity, memory, and confidence, about the ability of a country to assert itself on its own terms. Let's continue. Chapter 6: The Neighborhood First Policy, Challenges and Calculations. India's geography makes South Asia both a strategic asset and a policy minefield. Jaishankar is candid. While India has cultural and civilizational linkages with its neighbors, diplomacy in the region is often difficult due to historical baggage with Pakistan, political instability in Nepal, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Chinese influence via debt, infrastructure, and strategic ports, e.g. Hambantota in Sri Lanka, Gwadar in Pakistan. On Pakistan, Jaishankar firmly rejects the idea of dialogue for dialogue's sake. He argues that terrorism cannot be delinked from diplomacy. India's surgical strikes 2016 and Balakot airstrikes 2019 are signals of a more assertive posture. On South Asia, India's focus is now on connectivity, development partnerships, and cultural diplomacy. Institutions like BIMSTEC and initiatives like Project Mausam and Sagarmala aim to balance regional integration with strategic caution. He emphasizes neighborhood first, but with delivery and discipline. Chapter 7: The Indian Ocean, a Strategic Frontier. The Indian Ocean is no longer just a maritime periphery, it is the front line of India's global strategy. Jaishankar calls it the primary theater of geopolitical competition for India, especially as China expands its naval footprint from the Straits of Malacca to Djibouti. India's response has been multi-pronged. Revival of IRA Indian Ocean Rim Association. Expansion of naval diplomacy, e.g. Malabar exercises with US, Japan, Australia. Establishment of Information Fusion Center, Indian Ocean Region, IFCIR, to monitor maritime activity. Building infrastructure and goodwill in Seychelles, Mauritius, Maldives, Sri Lanka. This approach blends security, development, and influence, guided by the principle of Sagar, security and growth for all in the region. Chapter 8: Strategic Culture and Civilizational Confidence. In one of the most philosophically rich sections of the book, Jaishankar argues that India's foreign policy must reflect its civilizational ethos. He critiques India's post-independence elite four, disassociating diplomacy from India's cultural roots, over-intellectualizing foreign policy at the cost of grounded realism, embracing non-alignment as moral superiority rather than strategic necessity. He writes, "We are a civilizational state pretending to be a post-colonial one." India's traditions from Kautilya's Arthashastra to Ashoka's Dhamma, from Buddhist diplomacy to maritime trade with Southeast Asia, offer a legacy of engagement, resilience, and statecraft. His point, India must not mimic the West nor reject it. Instead, it must integrate historical memory with modern tools to define its own India way. Chapter 8: Strategic Culture and Civilizational Confidence. In one of the most philosophically rich sections of the book, Jaishankar argues that India's foreign policy must reflect its civilizational ethos. He critiques India's post-independence elite four, disassociating diplomacy from India's cultural roots, over-intellectualizing foreign policy at the cost of grounded realism, embracing non-alignment as moral superiority rather than strategic necessity. He writes, "We are a civilizational state pretending to be a post-colonial one. India's traditions from Kautilya's Arthashastra to Ashoka's Dhamma, from Buddhist diplomacy to maritime trade with Southeast Asia, offer a legacy of engagement, resilience, and statecraft." His point, India must not mimic the West nor reject it. Instead, it must integrate historical memory with modern tools to define its own India way. Chapter 9: Multilateralism, Ideals versus Reality. Jaishankar is skeptical of today's multilateral institutions. He notes that platforms like the UN, WTO, and even the WHO are often gridlocked, unrepresentative, and dominated by outdated power equations. India's key concerns: UN Security Council reform has stalled. Global South voices remain marginalized. Climate, trade, and tech governance reflect Western biases. India's strategy is to engage where useful but also build new coalitions. BRICS with Brazil, Russia, China, South Africa. IDC with Brazil and South Africa. Quad with US, Japan, and Australia. International Solar Alliance launched with France. Jaishankar calls this issue-based multilateralism a pragmatic way to build coalitions of the willing on matters of shared interest, from climate change to supply chain resilience. Chapter 10: Looking Ahead, India's Foreign Policy Toolkit. As the book draws to a close, Jaishankar lays out the core elements of India's diplomatic future. 1. Strategic clarity. India must know its own goals clearly. Regional dominance, global voice, economic power, and pursue them unapologetically. 2. Policy agility. The world is not static. India must be able to shift alliances, update strategies, and balance competing relationships without losing direction. 3. Capability building. Diplomacy without leverage is hollow. India must invest in economic strength, military modernization, technology and data control, education and skilled diplomacy. 4. Narrative ownership. India must shape the global conversation on democracy, development, digital equity, and civilizational respect. Being reactive is no longer enough. Chapter 11: The India Way. A synthesis. So, what is the India Way? Jaishankar defines it as a blend of realism, self-interest, history, and innovation. It is not about alliances but partnerships, not about isolation but selective engagement, not about status quo but shaping outcomes, not about West or East but about India first. The India Way is the belief that strategy must be dynamic, diplomacy must be assertive, and identity must be acknowledged. It is an evolving doctrine that understands power respects power, narrative matters, and no one else will protect India's interests except India itself. Final reflection. The India Way is more than a foreign policy book. It is a call for strategic self-respect. Jaishankar, with decades of diplomatic experience, invites India to look beyond nostalgia and idealism and engage the world with clarity, purpose, and confidence. In a time when the world is neither bipolar nor truly multipolar, but chaotically interlinked, India must be principled yet pragmatic, firm yet flexible, and always guided by its own civilizational compass. Because the future will not be given. It must be navigated the Indian way.
You're watching, learning, feeling. Will you stay with us? Just one click to subscribe means everything.